tonight. We do have the microphones. We tried the mics up front last time. It did not work. You could not hear any of the questions that were being asked. So if you have a question, if you could get one of the mics, raise your hand or get one of the mics and ask it over the mic. I will try again to repeat the question as well, but it will help the people who are listening to us virtually if they have that. I did notice we do have, I think, 4 or 5 people who have actually signed on and joined the group to listen to us virtually. That doesn't mean they're going to do it, but at least they were good enough to sign on and say that they would like to be a part of it. So my mic is on right now. Those are on too. Yeah, if you, yeah, it just goes in there. Yeah. I guess mine goes everywhere, but the big thing is it goes back to Kevin and he gets it on the disc for us. We're also going to try to do something a little bit different tonight. We've got the PowerPoint behind me, but I'm going to try to be writing stuff on the board too. So we'll see how this all works as we try phase 2 of our study. Does that make sense? Are we all ready? Oh yeah. I'd like to welcome you then to the second of our explorations in spirituality. As you know, the winter snows that we had last week took out not only our Sunday night, but our Wednesday night experiences of last week. Hopefully we are back on track tonight. It's going to kind of alter a little bit how we continue on with these studies, particularly the Sunday night study. The Sunday night is a cooperative study together with our 2 sister churches, with Meridian Avenue and with South Riverside. I don't have as much leeway with what goes on there. So what we are going to do is continue on, just push everything back a week, and then actually do the last 2 sessions on the final night, which is the 24th, Sunday evening, the 24th of March. For us here, it's just Westside Baptist who's doing this in conjunction with y'all virtually. So we have more leeway of what we're going to do, and because of that, I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to push things back a week and run through, and then during Lent, during Holy Week, we will not have a session on the Wednesday night. Now remember, that's because we're giving you the opportunity to participate in 3 different spiritual exploration times. We have a Monday, Thursday service, which will be here at Westside at 7 o'clock, no, at 5:30 on Thursday. We have a Good Friday service, which is a cooperative Good Friday service, which is going to be over at Sunnyside Baptist at 7 o'clock on Friday. And then we have a Easter sunrise service, which will be at 7:15 this year over at Herman Hill Park on the Arkansas River. And that will be followed up by a Easter breakfast. Meridian Avenue is opening up their Easter breakfast. So if you would like to have an Easter breakfast on Easter Sunday, we are going to be going there as well. Then after Easter, we're going to come back together. And on the 3rd, we're going to have our session on rules of faith, particularly looking at Wesley's rules of faith, but possibly as well some of the Benedictine rules of faith. And then we'll close on April the 10th when we look at the idea of pilgrimage, and more specifically the concept of taking a virtual pilgrimage. When we met last time, we talked about the difference between mysticism, spirituality, and spiritualism. Can anybody give me a definition of any of these 3 ideas? Mysticism, spiritualism, spirituality. How would you define any of those? Not all at once. Anybody have an idea? What is mysticism? Secretive religions. Yeah, you have to use the mic or it doesn't get on the... Secretive religions. But not exactly, isn't it? Is it? It's not so much secretive. What makes it the mystical aspect?
Punch your shoulder.
What makes it mystical?
Well, I think much of it is internalized,
Okay.
and essentially communications between the penitent and the Lord himself.
That's a good point. The mystical part, it's internalized. It's about us, isn't it? And it's our connection with the higher power, with God, Yahweh, connection with something beyond ourselves. Spiritualism. Do you remember what spiritualism is? Spiritualism is actually a religious belief, isn't it? Spiritualism is that idea that we can connect with the dead and that the dead want to communicate with us, and is sort of something that came out of primarily North America, but also spread to Europe and some ways down into South America as well. The idea that the dead want to communicate with us, and so we go through mediums, and that progressed to the point where the concepts and doctrines really got institutionalized into a faith system, institutional faith system, spiritualism. So it's become a religious belief. Now
That doesn't have anything to do with God, though, does it? It's just between the spirits and us.
Yes. The focus is, yes, on connections with other world spirits. Yeah. I think other things come into that as well in the spiritualistic denominations, but that is the key, the basis behind it. You've also got the idea of the spiritual. What is spiritual? What does it mean to be spiritual in your idea, in your understanding? Yes.
In touch with God.
In touch with God. And even the whole idea we talked last week of refinding the ideal, re-becoming what we were before we fell away at creation. And so that also then changes depending on the religious belief system, right? The religious ideal can be a variety of different things. For Judaism, the religious idea is the Torah. For us, it is Christ. Buddhism, it is Buddha, etc. So we have these three different ideas. We talked about what it is to be mystical, which is pretty much internalized. Spiritualism, which is the creation of a new institution, and then the idea of being spiritual, which is more of an organized search for the ideal. So if we think of it from that concept, how are these three the same, but maybe more importantly, how are they different? Any ideas? No?
How are they the same? They aren't connected with our money or our um, comfort seeking. Um, they can't be, or they can't be touched, felt, pictured that way.
Yeah, it's not about monetary achievement. It's not about things of this world or things you can really touch, as much as it is this idea of they all are ways that we try to connect beyond ourselves, aren't they? That it's not just me who's important in this world, in this life. There's something greater. There's something else out there. So there's this connection beyond self. Now, how would you think these things would be different? These three ideas would be different then? Remember, oh, go ahead, Dave.
Well, that's my concept, that those that we would think of as mystical are really working hard to develop themselves into what God wants them to be. And they're looking for that personal interconnection with God so that literally they live their whole life in his footsteps.
Yeah, yeah. And in some ways that's a little bit like being spiritual too, isn't it? Very much. Yeah. Do you
Very
remember
much.
the, what was that, the show that was on Sesame Street that always sang the song, one of these things is like the other, one of these things is just the same. I sing that because you can say that about these three things. Mysticism, and spiritualism are very similar. They are both very different than spiritualism, right? These two ideas are really about individuals, connections, right? They are the attempt of the individual to connect with God. And we see that spiritualism is actually more of a very specific, even denominational belief, institutionally focused belief. Mystical, spiritual goes beyond denomination. It goes beyond sect. It goes beyond specific faith beliefs and can be much greater than that. In many respects, if we look at spiritualism, it is that understanding of something that is really relatively new for us here in the Western culture, originating in the 19th century, that evolved from that idea of individual mediums that would go around in many times in tent lectures, much like the Great Awakening and Second Great Awakening tent camp meetings that they had. The same thing was taking place as these mediums went around, created seances, mass meetings to contact those who have died, and has gone from that into a denominational religion, a denominational religious belief. A whole variety of different denominational type religious beliefs, but still one. Mysticism and spirituality are very ancient. We can, with our Western traditions and Western religious concepts, we can run them back about 3,000 years, if you will, as people began to seek out and to use ways to connect with God. Mysticism, mystical practice, represents how the individual nurtures those experiences, right? And if we look at spiritual practice, it tends to place the focus on transformation of self toward the original mold. And again, the Torah, Christ, Buddha, Islam, Muhammad, to work to accomplish that original mold. Now, we've also noted that in modern times, spirituality has changed as well. The idea of spirituality has changed as well. Can you remember how that's different now? Basically, for about the last 3,000 years, we can say that spiritualism has been focused on a religious base, on that perfect mold archetype. That has been changed now, hasn't it? No? Yes, a nod. There we go. I couldn't hear that nod, but I did acknowledge it. Yeah, it still has a focus on the process of transformation, but it is no longer necessarily associated with religious institutions. Does that make sense?
Well, one thing I would note is that for those of us of the Judeo-Christian belief that all of our spirituality is God-centered. There is a lot of spirituality now that essentially focuses on Gaia, the Earth Mother, and those forces of nature. Now, those have been there for a long time too, but they're gaining prominence.
They're what?
They're gaining prominence.
I still didn't hear it.
They're gaining prominence.
Oh, gaining prominence. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, they are. And perhaps what we have talked about over the past weeks is even more than that. Spirituality is not associated so much with a religious belief at all. Not one of the New Age beliefs, not one of the Judeo-Christian beliefs, not one of the ancient revivals of ancient practices like Gaia worship, Mother God, or Goddess worship, but instead the ability of the individual to transform themselves not towards a perfect archetype, but to transform themselves to be a better you. Does that make sense? And the idea more and more is becoming that you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. You don't have to be in an organized religious setting or institution in order to be spiritual. That's the rise here in America that we see of the spiritual and not affiliated with anything. And so that is a growing difference. Spirituality has become more of one's personal inner experience, all right? That it is your experience as you individually transform, and the religious side of that, the organized side of that, is to press people into that ideal mode.
I think there's a real danger in that you can look at yourself as a god and even develop self-worship in that.
That is a possibility, yeah. It depends on what your ultimate goal is, I think. Yeah. We see people throughout time who focus not on transforming themselves, but on becoming the ideal for everybody else to look to. And yeah, that has definite problems associated with it, is the only way I can think of saying that. Yeah. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts about spirituality as we look at it?
Well, if you were talking about having an experience that transformed yourself and so on, but not being connected with a church or whatever, it seems to me that when one has something like that you seek for other people who will understand, share it, have had some kind of experience themselves, and that kind of forms a group, a support group.
Humans are funny animals, aren't they? We, a lot of times, think of ourselves as apart and individual, especially here in America. It's a great thing that we focus on our individuality, we focus on our oneness, and then ultimately we do kind of run into the idea that humans are community animals by nature. We thrive as we get into larger groups.
We need it.
We need other people to be around us and to be part of us. It is one of the interesting things as we looked at some of the mystics in the early Christian church several months ago as we were going through our study on the early church, and how they at first separated themselves, but it came to the point where they began to come back into community because they realized that they also needed to be with other people, but even more than that, they realized that other people needed to be with them. Okay? And I think that's something that we very often forget in the church today. It's not even so much that you need to be in community as you need to be with other people to help them as well. Okay? that when you are missing, they miss you. Many times even more than you miss them.
Well, in helping other people, you grow yourself.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to grow without other people in some respect.
Absolutely. As you can see, as we begin to talk about being spiritual, we aren't talking about a specific religion. All religious beliefs provide practices that allow you to be spiritual. That's true for the Eastern religions. It's also true for the Western religions. There are things we do that allow us to focus our spiritual lives. We're not even talking about an individual's personal transformation alone. Being spiritual is something that we can do individually. We can do it collectively. We can do it informally. And being spiritual is something we can do very formally as well. However, no matter how you participate in your own spirituality, it requires practice. Did you hear what I just said? No matter how you participate in your own spirituality, it requires practice. You got to work at it. It's not something that just comes naturally to you. No matter how you do this, you have to practice what you are trying to achieve. So let me ask this question. How do you practice your spirituality?
Well, I think the specific defined times for prayer are one of them.
I'm sorry?
A defined time for your own personal prayer.
Okay. Okay, this is one of the ways of doing it. Prayer is a spiritual practice. One of the things you find out is the more you pray, you don't get better at it per se, but you find yourself more willing to participate in it. That connectedness, that's why we pray, isn't it? Is it connects us with God. Anything else? How about somebody else? How do you practice your spirituality?
You meet with other people that are. You meet with other people that do
Okay.
it.
When we meet together, we can practice our spirituality. Yeah. And spirituality isn't just showing up, is it? Baptists love to eat. We just got done eating. Just coming together to eat is great. It provides wonderful fellowship, But eating in and of itself isn't spirituality, is it? It's getting together and having a meal. I think we always see, almost every time we see Christ, we see him breaking bread with somebody, somehow. And I think there's a reason for that, because as we break bread, as we come together, it joins us in some very special ways. But that in itself isn't spirituality alone, is it? When we meet together to be more than one in order to practice our spirituality. Sort of like that text, wherever two or more of you are gathered in my name, the Holy Spirit is there. Right. That's a good concept from our belief system. Anybody else?
I think through acts of virtue.
Okay. I'm going to put this, and then tell me why it's wrong. Being nice.
Objective versus subjective.
Yes, very much so. Objective versus subjective. Practicing virtue from a spiritual standpoint isn't just being nice to other people, is it? What is it?
Sometimes it could be not nice, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Sometimes people need us to be not nice. We always have this meek, mild understanding of who Jesus Christ is, unless you look at him during that last week of his life. He's mad several times, and he lets everybody know it. As he throws the money changers out, as he condemns the Pharisees, as he looks on Jerusalem and says, you guys are going down because you're not paying attention to who God is and what God is. Yeah, practice. We've got to practice these things, and we need to actually practice them together in many respects. Do you have a comment?
I was just going to say that as we meet together and pray together, we do ask, what can we do to serve you, to serve God, in our relationship to God. So service has a lot to do with,
I think that's a good point. Being other-focused. Service, either service to God, service to other people, is very important, isn't it?
Because we represent God to others.
Yes, good point, good point. Yes.
If spirituality is, I hate these things. Spirituality is the quest for becoming closer to the image of God. I think we have to do study in the Word so that we have an accurate idea of what the image of God truly is.
Yeah, I agree. That's part of the spiritual practice, and that again goes across board, doesn't it? That the texts that you see as holy need to be studied to give us an understanding of what that ideal is, but also how we should act. Yeah, good point, good point. Spirituality in many ways is about developing and connecting yourself to the higher power or to God. And the reason we participate in spiritual practice is because we are trying to develop that ability to connect within ourselves. That means to be spiritual is to be disciplined. We need to be disciplined in what we say. We need to be disciplined in how we act. And we need to even be disciplined in how we think about other people and how we think about God. Over the next 4 weeks, we're actually going to try to explore a variety of different ways to begin to develop our own spiritual discipline. This is where I really need all of your input, and this is where if you out there in the virtual world would like to join in and explore with us, this is where we really need some of those ideas and some of those concepts to come in, to begin to talk about what it means to participate in spiritual disciplines, what spiritual disciplines are, how to make them personal, but also how to make them larger than just us as well. We're going to very roughly follow Richard Foster's book, A Celebration of Discipline. Foster presents 3 different ideas in his book. He talks about how we develop spiritual practice that gives us inward discipline, that we have spiritual practice that gives us outward discipline, and we have spiritual practice that creates a corporate discipline, a discipline among all of us. And so we're going to look at each of those 3 things. Then also, I mentioned earlier, we were going to look at, after we come back from Easter break, we're going to look at some of the things like John Wesley's 3 simple rules, and maybe even get into some of the ideas of Benedictine spirituality and what that means and how that actually is lived out. If we look at Foster, he talks about inward disciplines. Do you have any idea what those inward disciplines are? On the top? Meditation? Prayer? No. It is one of them, but not an inward discipline. Yeah, meditation, prayer, fasting, study, those 4 things that really help us center ourselves. And then he talks about outward disciplines, simplicity, how we treat others, and the way that we live, solitude, submission, service. Those are ways we interact with other people, and how we also interact in our lives with God. And then the corporate disciplines are things like confession, worship, guidance, celebration. We can't forget that one, can we? No. Too many times we do forget that one. We think that when we come together as a group, that we have to be silent, we have to be somber. I always immediately think of the image of David bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and being chastised by his wife because he's flailing around and allowing everybody to see him in a state that a king should never be seen in. And he did that because he was full of joy and celebration. When we look through the Old Testament in particular, the Torah, it talks time and time again about all of the different instruments that are used to celebrate and to bring joy to God. So we cannot forget celebration. It is a part of who we are. Foster actually comes from a Quaker background. In fact, he served as professor over at Friends University for quite a number of years. So in some ways, we've got a connection with him because he is a fellow Wichitonian. Is that how you say that? From Wichiton? He was from Wichita for a period, and so we do have that connection with him. He also is someone who has very focused his life on the idea and study of spiritual disciplines. That takes us out of our purely Baptist focus as well, though, doesn't it? And begins to move us in a larger field. I think these are both important aspects, but they are not enough. If we are going to practice our own spirituality, if we're going to interact with other people in our world today, we need to go beyond just understanding what it means to be my faith tradition. Does that make sense? To explore larger concepts of spirituality in our world today, I think we need to be willing to move beyond Christianity, beyond just understanding what it means to be a Christian. We need to come to grips with how everybody experiences God, how everybody comes into the presence of God. As we begin exploring the differences between spiritualism and spirituality and mysticism, we saw how it is practiced in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different places. But one of the reasons we do that is because it also then helps us understand much better where we come from. It helps us understand what it means to practice spirituality as a Christian for me, but for others, what it means to practice their own particular type of spirituality. We need to see how others experience this connection of God, because it gives us a better understanding of how we connect with God. Where our spirituality is the same, where our spirituality is different, and why our spirituality is the same and different. And I think if we do that, it gives us the ability, as we understand these differences, to grow and mature in our own faith, and to grow and mature in our own spirituality, and to understand better our own faith connections. Does that make sense? Does that seem feasible? Plausible? Necessary? Yeah, I think it kind of is, isn't it? It is kind of necessary for us to understand ourselves. We also need to understand people around us. What makes us unique, what makes us the same, and why. So we've got these three different ways of living, according to Foster. We've got inward discipline, outward discipline, corporate discipline. What do you think about these? Are these ideas, are these ways that you could actually live your life? Okay. It is what we are called to do. Yeah. I think as we look at any most any scripture, it will begin with a baseline, and it will present a baseline, and it will say, this is the minimum. And then it will also say, if you just make the minimum, you don't cut the mustard. You got to go beyond the minimum. That is true for every faith perspective. And I know it's especially true in Christianity. It's not enough just to do what you have to do. It's moving beyond what you have to do into what you're willing to do, and to practice it enough that you get to the point where that's what you automatically do, because it's the right thing, because you want to do it, because it connects you with other people and it connects you with God. When we get into the fourth week, we're going to look at those three simple rules that were presented by John Wesley. Wesley's rules of faith challenge us to think beyond ourselves and just beyond our own needs. The rules that he presented are very simple. I mean, they really are. They're so simple, it's almost impossible to think that's not what you should do. Sort of like what Jesus said. Remember what Jesus said when they asked him what the greatest commandment was? Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. Those are pretty simple rules, aren't they? But try to do it. It simple rules, easy to understand, but hard to actually put into practice. Think about the rules that John Wesley put forward. Do no harm. Do no harm. Make sure that your actions don't cause anybody else to suffer in any way. And that means not only physically, but financially, emotionally, spiritually. Do no harm. Very simple rule. But how do you put it into practice? How do you treat others in such a way that everything you do does no harm to other people? And as you said earlier, that doesn't even necessarily mean not punishing them.
It's the subjective versus the objective.
Yes, very much, very much. Wesley's second rule is to do good. This one I think is harder than doing no harm. When I think of doing no harm, it just means I have to keep from doing stuff that I shouldn't be doing in the first place, right? That I kind of have a grasp on. To do good means that it's not enough to just stand by and allow suffering to happen to somebody else. Yeah, that's a little bit different, isn't it? It's not enough to just stand by and allow suffering to happen. You need to make sure that everything that you do makes a difference in other people's lives and makes their lives better. Yeah. And the third one is stay in love with God. That there's an acknowledgement even by Wesley that you're in love with God or you wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. The hard part isn't being in love with God. The hard part is staying in love with God. It's kind of like being married, isn't it? It's easy to fall in love. It's real hard to stay married because you have to work at it. If you love me, keep my commandments. Yeah. Stay in love with God. Don't just come to God and commit and say, yes, I want to be with you, but also commit to continue to build your relationship. Relationship for us as Christians, relationship is more than recognition of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, isn't it? That's the beginning. That's that baseline that we talked about. To stay in love with God means you need to live your life with Jesus as your example and try to emulate Jesus in everything that you do. We're going to close the spiritual exploration time that we have by soaring into the realm of pilgrimage. And I do think the concept of pilgrimage has really guided the connection of people with God in our Western traditions for the last 3,000 years. It tends to be connected with religious locations or sites. Those are tied to the great people, the great prophets. In Jerusalem, we can see that that's a connection point for Judaism. Rome and Jerusalem are a connection point for Christianity, Western Christianity. We've got the idea of Mecca as a connection point for Islam. These are places you go to enhance your own idea and understanding of connection with God. They're central sites. They're sites that have significance, sacred significance to those who follow. The pilgrimages are quite often spiritual and physical journeys, but they're ways to allow you to actually touch, spiritually and physically, to touch the places of the past, the sacred sites, the insights of all of the years, centuries of your belief system, and to confirm your belief in the holy concept with that idea of a collective excitation of God. What does that mean? A collective excitation of God. What does that mean? The picture we've got up here is a picture of the Via della Rosa at Easter. You could imagine being one of the pilgrims on this road. This is the road that scriptures say Jesus walked on his way to Golgotha, to his crucifixion and the cross. You can see they're carrying a cross on Easter sunrise, Easter morning, carrying that cross along. It's not just a personal vigil, but look at all the people who are there with him. As many as can get smushed into the street are there, following that cross along. So it's more than just yourself. It's more than just being at the place. It's part of that getting excited, getting indwelled, getting enthused about what has happened in the past and remembering the past in order to prepare me for the future. That's what pilgrimage is all about. This also isn't just an ancient practice. This is an older photograph, so maybe it doesn't happen anymore. But indeed, we know that it does. It still goes on. It's alive. It's thriving today. In the 21st century, 39 of the most popular sites around the world, religious sacred sites around the world, receive an estimated 200 million visitors every year. 200 million visitors every year. There's also a growing awareness within the faith organizations that this fulfillment of a spiritual obligation to go on that pilgrimage can conflict with the spiritual obligation that we have also been given to care for our natural world. In response to these concerns, there's actually a group called the Green Pilgrimage Network that was inaugurated in 2011. The Green Pilgrimage Network is an organization that has joined together with the municipalities and with the organizations and with the authorities from a variety of different faith traditions, from the Baha'i, Buddhist, Christian, Taoist, Islamic, Jewish, Shinto, Sikh, those sacred sites. And they have recognized the impact people have by showing up on the land, on the environment, and even on the people who still live there. And because of this, what they're trying to do is to create a positive footprint for pilgrims, rather than leaving that negative footprint. When I was growing up, one of the big slogans was, take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints. The Green Coalition would say, try not to leave the footprint either, because that has a lasting impact on what's there. You will be happy to know that as we explore the concept of virtual pilgrimage, that you will not be creating a negative impact on the religious sacred sites that we're going to look at. We're going to explore how we can actually be part of that pilgrimage and yet still stay at home, but visually, virtually experience those sacred sites that are so much a part of your faith tradition. I think we've got an exciting time ahead of us over the next couple of weeks as we explore through, and I invite all of you to come along on this journey. I invite you to tell other people what we're doing and ask them to virtually follow along with us as we explore our spirituality and what spirituality means for other people. Thank you very much.